Cool. Okay, let me just focus, get ready to go.
Then should we all meditate and
Yeah, I
touch the
just get a quick,
screen, touch our,
yeah, everyone.
yep, there you
Woo.
go. Bam.
Good. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Unsubscribe, the Demand Drive podcast. I am your host, AJ Alonso, and I'm joined by Alex Ellison, as always, basically at this point as my co-host. Alex, how you doing?
I'm good. I mean, I skip an episode here and there. I'm not totally consistent. You don't want me to
That's
be too
fair.
predictable.
Count on him. You can't count on him, man. He's unpredictable. He's crazy.
He's a wild card, and I guess I like it that way. Sometimes you're here, sometimes you're not. But when you're here, it's nice to balance the episode a bit. I don't get to do as much talking, which is nice. Alex, who do we have today as our guest? Because it's not just the two of us talking. That would be insane. Go listen to our last episode. It'd be crazy if we didn't have a guest. Who do we have with us today?
Yeah, today we've got Scott Levy. I didn't check beforehand. Hopefully I pronounced that name right.
Perfect.
Perfect. Sweet. So yeah, Scott's the CEO over at ResultMaps. Scott, I'll let you take it yourself if you want to introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, I'm Scott Levy. I'm CEO and founder of ResultMaps. We're a platform that helps CEOs get visibility into how their strategy is being executed at every level of the organization with strategy execution software. And around that, we do a lot to help CEOs, leaders, and their teams get clear on what their vision actually is, what their strategy actually is. How do we optimize for that and get around kind of all the process traps and dogma and just get everybody focused on building a great success story together?
And that just
That's
segues
us.
perfectly into the topic that we've got today for the episode. So we've been talking a lot this month specifically around core values for organizations. And a lot of the stuff that we've produced so far around that topic has been more on the individual contributor, SDR, even SDR manager type level. How does understanding your values as a rep help you career-wise and then sort of fitting in at the company-wise as a puzzle piece see success? But the reality of the situation, and Scott, why you're here, is that a lot of the initiatives around identifying and building core values starts at the executive level. And it really is on that team to identify, like, what are the core values that we have? How can we build them in a way that makes sense? And then how can we roll them out to the company where people are happy? So we wanted to take this with a different lens and kind of look at the value building process from the executive level and really understand what that process looks like from an executive standpoint, how important it is to build those values and really solidify them, and then how you keep up with values as your company changes and matures, how you're able to stay dynamic and agile with them and make sure that they still mean something and the same thing to you 1, 5, 10 years down the road. So I think just to start the conversation off, knowing that contextually that's it, I think we need to start at the beginning of actually identifying and building values. So from an executive standpoint, I'm sure, Scott, you have a lot of examples and stories that you can tell. How can someone start that process from that like C-suite level, and work its way through the organization?
Yeah, it's a great question. And what I like to suggest that people do, and this comes, I've collected these different techniques over the years and tried them out and seen just what unlocks people to get it done. And one of the first things you can do is you can kind of create I don't know if I can say this on this podcast, but your bitch list. Like,
say whatever
what are
you
the
want,
things,
man.
what are the things that stress you out when they go wrong? What are the things that, have really kind of challenged your emotional balance because someone didn't do a thing that you just expected them to do? But ultimately, there wasn't a clean way to explain to them what you really needed to do, or you were just frustrated. Like those trigger items can be a great place to go because you take those negatives and then you feed those into the rest of the process I'll give you, which is one of the best things you can do is think about someone you've worked with or someone you've worked for or someone you've seen who just crushed it when it came to whatever that issue was. Like, what's the opposite and who's the example? And then you just lay it out in kind of Pixar story format. And we literally have a spreadsheet. If you're cool, I'll make it available, in like your show
Yeah.
notes or whatever.
Yeah.
But it basically just takes you through the Pixar format. There was this time, and there was this person, this guy, this gal, whatever, and they were facing this situation, and this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And you walk them through, I don't know, it's like 5 steps. And then you take a step back and go, what's the title of that story? What's the behavior they exhibited? And how could I frame that as a behavior that's easy for me to call out every time somebody does it? And the key there is you can call it out when someone does it, because if you can do that, you can encourage it. And if you're encouraging a behavior, you're being intentional about your culture. And where I think a lot of people get just, we all find ourselves so many times overwhelmed by all the blog posts and all the marketing around this idea of core values. They're really just the behaviors we want to encourage. And that's what makes up a culture: the behaviors we want to encourage, the behaviors we want to discourage. And if we think about it behaviorally, we can build those in a way that it's easy for people to see and lean into. And now, if we can find opportunities to high five them, we can truly build a culture. So I took it all the way through the process, but I often find, like, starting there, because so many people are so triggered by any sort of vision exercise, any sort of strategy exercise. We all know you have to have them, or we all feel the pains. But to get people, into that space where they can think creatively, it's often like, okay, let's just go ahead and say, what are the problems here, and why do you think this will be fluffy? What's stressing you out? The other option, if you don't have that going on, is just to go right into who's your favorite employee? Who's the favorite person on your team, and what's something they did? With that type of process, you're able to start unlocking this code of what your culture is, what you really value. There's other ways other people have done it. I've got a friend who's a CEO who, they brought in a consultant. I think she did a lot of surveys and had a method he really loved. But I like simple. Everybody I talk to, is high growth. They're busy. They may have a family. They certainly have a ton going on. And so they need things quickly. So we found this to be the aha thing. Just describe that person. Now, if you can take, say half a dozen of those or 10 of those and put them on a spreadsheet and kind of get out some team members that you have really clear and strong feelings about, you should be able to get a sense of, am I painting a picture of my top performers and low performers by whether, I'd give them a thumbs up, a thumbs down, or an in each of these areas. And so it can be pretty simple that way. And there's some really great writings out there. That kind of thumbs up, thumbs down approach I got from the book Traction by Gino Wickman. He's got a great system for core values and a lot of other things that help businesses.
That's awesome. Yeah. And thank you so much for sort of walking through the whole process there. I think it'll set up the conversation really well. One of the things that I really want to point out that you touched on there is the fact that these values, whether they're identified or not, kind of already exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're saying, think about past tense, the employees that you like, or this story that already happened to you in the workplace.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that when we were going through developing our own company values at Demand Drive, a similar thing happened that I didn't really realize was going to happen. It was like, oh, these values are like already in place in a sense. A lot of people are working and living into them, but they're not identified. They just don't know that they're doing that. So
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear maybe a little bit more about getting that first step going, getting to that point where people sort of might have that aha moment. They're like, oh, this is really important to identify. Now that I've done that, I can see how what I did in the past worked and didn't work, and how what I want to do in the future, will work around them.
Yeah, it's I think the aha I tell people is, look, this is really simple if you let it be. The number one reason, according to this study published in the Harvard Business Review, the number one reason strategy execution fails. So when we're talking about strategy execution, we're talking about whatever's in your head about where you're going to go. It fails. And it fails an abysmally high percentage of the time. But the number one reason it does is you have unclear values and conflicting priorities. So if you can take some of those, both the great things you want to keep in your company and then the hot buttons that you want to avoid, like the things that bog you down, and you have those where everyone can see them, when you're in any sort of format for decision making, they do start to guide you. And I've seen this, I've got, some people close to me work at J&J where they're using a credo for them that's, God, it's more than 100 years old now. And it's still guiding their behaviors. And then I've seen startups adopt this where as soon as you start calling them out, you realize how powerful it is. Because we think that we're all mind readers. Like for whatever reason, humans, we believe other humans can read our minds. Mm-hmm. And the science says we suck at that. We're really, really, really bad at reading each other's minds. And so these cultural cues are always happening and we're kind of blundering our way through it. And as soon as you start to make them explicit and clear, it's really powerful. And, we were talking, I don't know if it made the recording or not. We're talking about football. So, I was a short Jewish kid on a team that produced 7 NFL players and, another 7 D1 recruits. I mean, we still are like one of the top high school programs there's ever been in terms of just output. But what always motivated me to keep going was you would have these high performers, pat you on the back and tell you good job when you exhibited a core value. And it's intoxicating because it makes you better. And you go, okay, when I do this, when I put my energy into this, people around me appreciate it. And we're wired that way. We've evolved as social creatures to respond to that. Unfortunately, in a company environment, we're so, the last 100 years was all about industrial production lines. Basically, if you look at everything that happens, whether it's agile methodologies or anything else, they all come from industrial production lines. And it's not very human. They're cool for making cars and widgets and things, but really bringing out in a simple way the core values. I find that once people realize you can get away from all those complicated like industrial human resources ideas, and now I'm making this explicit, and I'm not just encouraging one person, but when I do that, everybody around them goes, yeah, I should do more of that. Now our ears are pricked. We're looking for opportunities to do it. Our senses wake up, and it creates a virtuous cycle. What are the tipping points? They're different for every company, but that's like one of the most fun parts of my job is seeing, like, we give people ways to internalize that and really make it part of their systems. And yeah, I mean, I have one CEO who texted me the first time he gave somebody a high five. I had some others who were just like they brought me into this strategic planning meeting and I was like, wow, my customers don't usually fly me out to do that. And they started gushing about it. It was really cool. Like, people respond to this as long as it's not fluffy, as long as it's something that's meaningful, as long as it aligns with what they really do value. And it's an opportunity if you let it be, I think of one person that was really cautious. This is a VP of sales, Inc. 5000 company. I mean, they'd really crushed it, and he'd been a big part of that. And when he and I first met, and he wasn't quite sure, how's this going to play out? He was very reluctant until, in talking to him, we realized, okay, well, where he had concerns, we're giving you a way to make those clear in your core values. So you can say things like, we always want to put people over processes. We always want to, do the right thing is like, I know everybody's got that. No offense if you guys have it, but like,
we don't.
Of course.
Yeah.
Nobody goes,
tough. That's not a core value of yours. It's pretty tough to swallow.
I'm going to do the wrong thing today. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, but I know people have it, and there's some great companies that have it. So no offense to you guys, whatever works for you. But for me, it's like, sometimes I need help figuring out what the right thing is, right. And in complicated situations where you're dealing with tons of information, it's not always a black and white thing. And, so an example would be, I've seen companies, and I should have gone and looked at their values, but like if you look at Very, where Jason McCann, their CEO, I love how he led and how that whole team led through the early days of the epidemic. Like one of their mission is, they call it elevating people. Like everybody's posting, everybody's working to embody their core values, not because they're their core values, but because they really are behaviors they value. Longer answer, maybe. I get excited talking about it, but tell me, like, did I answer your question? Because I'll go back and answer it too.
Yeah, no, I think that was great, and I think you touched on, I mean, a lot of important things. But yeah, one of the things that I think is interesting that we sort of switching tracks here a little bit, that we, I wouldn't say struggled with, but there was some friction that can happen, is when the CEO, right, they're like all in on the values initiative, they bring you in maybe. Do you ever run into situations where other members of the team maybe aren't into it, or maybe that's when they realize that their values don't align with the rest of senior leadership, or with the direction the company's going in?
Before ResultMaps, back when I was doing consulting, I saw that big time. And at the time, we weren't making those values explicit. And I think that was part of the problem. Um, I've seen, yeah, I've actually seen this a lot, but like we've gotten pretty good at filtering out sometimes if there's like a huge conflict. If it's a small conflict, I mean, there's a certain type of conflicts that's constructive. You want to have the conversation, and it's about prioritizing the values, not saying, well, that one doesn't have value. You know, if you've got a list of 18 core values, that's going to be hard to remember. But the biggest cases I've seen were more before companies were doing this. Usually what I see happen is it's not so much there's disagreement about the values, it's that one person may be pushing back, not realizing they're verbalizing a core value. So I've seen a customer where an individual rightly said, look, we want to charge forward and grow, but we need to dance with who brung us. He kept saying that over and over and over. He's expressing a core value. He didn't want to leave existing customers behind. It was super important to him. I mean, it was like it was awesome. It was inspiring to see how dedicated it was. And it took a while for the individual to understand that the rest of the things that were going on, as long as this was stated explicitly, they didn't need to be it didn't need to be a conflict. It could just be another core thing we value. I
That's
don't
a,
I don't think they arrived at dance with who brung us, but
oh man, I was going to say that's a pretty cool value to have. It's catchy. But it's interesting that you brought up the fact that like, and this is something that I'm curious to hear your opinion on, is that like, you know, you can build core values as a team, and then maybe years go by and the company matures and changes, and maybe senior leadership changes, and people who come in abide by the values because they were hired specifically because they exhibit some of them, or like they agree with the values that exist at the company, but they have opinions about some that should change or some that should update. And often there's like a disconnect, I would say probably is the best word to describe it, between the senior leadership and maybe the people who actually work at the company and experience the day to day and how they see the values over time. Because if I'm a CEO, and I mean, just generically, one of my values is work hard, right? Like I'm expecting you to work past your 9 to 5 and putting in extra hours to make the company grow and succeed, because that was a value when we were a startup. And now that we've maybe raised some money and we're more of that medium-sized business, like that's not really a need anymore. We can hire specialized skills, and that's a thing of the past, but it's remained a core value. How do you like modernize the way that you approach the, I don't know, like that process of changing the values based on maybe some of the disconnects between like senior leadership and what people are actually experiencing?
yeah, so that one resonates because I was actually on a call today with a CEO who was saying, man, we've been, until we reached this point, it was all about getting here. It's all about getting here. But now that we're here, I don't want to lose our edge. I don't want to become complacent. And I think it becomes like, how do you morph that into a better descriptor? Again, into something you can high five. Like, it's not sustainable. Startup life's not sustainable for the long term, especially if you have family or you have kids. Um, somebody ends up paying for all that. So it's like, so you have to come up with, I think, the way to evolve it. And I'm a big fan of iterating and learning. I mean, we've changed our core values. We've kept some of them in place, but we've tweaked them. And usually it's in response to, you know, there's an issue or something that we don't feel like we really have a clear way to address. And rather than it become something that the CEO has to make their own and it's in their own head, how can you make that part of a shared vision? I mean, that's what these are all tools to do, right? So for me, it's like iterate, clean it up, morph it. I think people get, we all read like Good to Great and Built to Last, and those are fantastic books if you haven't read them. But you always hear the example. And I'm a huge fan of Johnson and Johnson. They've got these immutable values that have lasted.
I was gonna say,
They're in,
speaking of old values, 100 years old, that's
yeah,
something that hasn't changed in a century.
but it's a credo, and they were laser focused on what they were doing. It was a point in time. That's really intimidating. That's like saying to, so if you're a startup, that's like saying to a kid, in grade school basketball, here's LeBron's scoring record. He's going to pass Wilt Chamberlain. What are you going to do? And I think that creates this whole perfectionism around them versus, hey, let's just start high-fiving the things that we want to make clear, that these are our clear core values. And by doing that, we can, I think, in this day and age, we'll probably iterate to great core values. It just depends on the stage of your company. I mean, I hope bars are around as long or longer than J&J's. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
I don't, you can't think about like how somebody 100 years from now is going to be reading it. It's like, how does this help the people that, I'm responsible for helping today?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a good way to put it.
Speaking of sort of looking at the past and now maybe looking towards the future a little bit, I feel like a lot of right now finding company values is a very human thing to tackle. There's not a lot of like technologies. You can't download a platform and just like find your company values, right? But obviously, as things become more automated, technology advances. Do you see finding values and values operationalizing them even becoming something that technology is going to be able to help us with in the future? And if so, what would you envision that looking like?
Well, I know what we do through our technology to operationalize core values. And it's, we've got a blend of all the project management and task management. Like that stuff's all great. And it's like, it's the price of entry. Like everybody's got all that. When you put that into a framework that means something, that helps you make decisions, now you can start to really systematize it. And rather than plugging in one more survey or one more high five, like we just weave it into everything, especially the core behaviors that we're trying to help companies do. Because I don't want you to create more tasks. I want you to grow your company and help your employees and impact the world. And great, make more tasks. Don't get me wrong. Please do. We love getting your data. We love, I'm not getting your data, but like getting your usage is what I'm saying. We love getting that in the system so you're interacting with it. But weaving those high fives through is a big thing. When it comes to writing them, I think today, if you just take that simple idea of telling the story, you can go to any of the great AI copywriting tools out there. Simplified's got a great one. Jarvis has a great one. I think there's Copy AI. There's several out there, and they can give you all kinds of fun titles, to help you rewrite them or rewrite your description. But I think what really makes it human is when you tell a story of, someone who's done it and someone who's exhibits it so that everybody can see it, and people take such pride in that. I mean, just little things. We all, I think it was something today. I gave somebody like a high five for a post they did, or like told them I thought was a really good post, and they like They gushed and said the nicest thing to me, and I was in a great mood the rest of the day. You know, we're human. We respond to these cues.
Mhm.
So I think it's a combination. Maybe there's going to be some more clever behavioral analysis, but I think that's a ways off. I don't know.
I mean, I like the simplistic aspect of it, right? Like if you conceptualizing all of this can be difficult. It's a lot to take in. It's a lot to, as like the executive of an organization, feel like kind of falls on your shoulders. But when you put it in the way that you did, where it's like you're just trying to encourage or discourage specific behaviors, and that can be as simple as, in cases from your position, giving a high five to someone who is doing the right thing, do the right thing, but like doing the thing that you want them to do. Um, Knowing that it can be that simple and building from there, I think is a lot better than the alternative, which is looking at all of the things it could be and then kind of floundering around expecting that, eventually something will come to you. But in reality, it's just like it's analysis paralysis at that point.
Yeah, if you get them out there, if you tell those stories, I mean, you start to see all these opportunities to weave them in, and all these opportunities um, where you have to make a decision and you can call on it. One of our customers is fantastic CEO. He's always like, you know what? Take action, get a data point, learn. Like he doesn't. To your point about analysis paralysis, it's really one of their core values. And I think about that, or I interviewed KD from Simplified, and their core values are so simple, like show, don't tell, keep it simple. And he talked in the interview again and again. They've had this crazy astronomical growth about how these core values inform that. And they're not elaborate. I think they might only have three. And that may change as they grow, or it may not, but you could just hear and you see in the product, it's providing those core values. And Apple is a company that kind of famously doesn't have them, but yet they do. They're
Right.
just so deep. You do, like, at this point, you don't have to state it because that mythology has been built. You know, everybody can go look at the evolution of the company and the ups and downs it's had. And that, it's one of my favorite companies, and I love their products. More power to them. But if I have to design a company and unclear values and conflicting priorities are my number one risk, I want to be a little more intentional about it now, today. Um, yeah.
Very cool. Um, well, Scott, this has been an enlightening conversation in terms of, if I were an executive at an organization, what I would want to do to make sure that I've built the values that make sense for my company, and how I can make sure to iterate on them and have them stay meaningful over the years as we grow. Because I think that's the big thing. I think that's what I really want people to get out of this episode, is knowing that, like, your values aren't set in stone, but your
Mm.
values also aren't, they can't be super fluid. You got to find that right balance so that you're building something that makes sense, and you're building something that speaks to people, but you feel like, as the executive, you can relay that effectively to your people, which I think we've done a good job at explaining.
Excellent. I'll give you one. When you say they're not set in stone, I'd
Oh yeah.
say maybe they are, but you're a sculptor. You're chiseling away,
Mhm.
right?
I
That
like that.
suggested itself, but I do think it's that way. Like you don't have to keep swapping them out, but you can iterate to them.
I like that. I like that. Hey, if people want to learn more about you, about ResultMaps, get more information about you, where can they find you?
www.resultmaps.com, and that's TM result maps, not results maps. So
Ah,
make sure it's one result, many maps when you enter it.
I like it. I'll make sure to include it in the show notes as well, so people don't get confused.
And we'll put some cool resources up at resultmaps.com/core values.
Love it. Awesome. Well, hey, thanks again for hopping on, Scott. Really appreciate it.
My
Um,
pleasure. Thanks for having me.
yeah, this has been remember to subscribe to the Unsubscribe podcast if you haven't already, and we'll see you next time.